A meeting between Zelensky and Putin under Trump's supervision. The US president does not rule out the possibility of such a meeting, but believes that organizing it could be problematic.
The hatred between Zelensky and Putin is boundless.
Do you still believe they will hold negotiations?
I don't know. I think I'll have to be the one to talk after all. They hate each other.
Do you think it could happen?
I don't know. Maybe yes. One way or another we'll sort this out, but for now it's hard to say. They hate each other so much, they can't even breathe. That's why I'll have to step in.
In my opinion, a three-way meeting is possible with Trump participating. And as for a one-on-one meeting, I just don't see that as a possibility at all. And it is abundantly clear that Vladimir Putin will absolutely never agree to meet with Volodymyr Zelensky one-on-one, face-to-face for any direct discussions. Maybe it's because he's afraid of him.
Trump also stated that the EU's sanctions against Russia are not tough enough.
Listen, Europe, they're my friends, but they're buying oil from Russia. So we can't be the only ones, who are going all out. But Europe is buying oil from Russia. I don't want them to buy oil. And the sanctions they're imposing aren't tough enough. I'm ready to impose sanctions, but they'll have to toughen their sanctions to the level of what I'm doing.
In response, China's foreign ministry is threatening a decisive reaction if NATO countries under US pressure impose tariffs on Russian oil.
Apparently, China is indeed concerned. It affects China. It's important to China. But I want to say, if it's important to China, then comrades, we're on the right track. I truly want to emphasize once again that those particular individuals who genuinely don't want to honor the established agreements within the European Union are, in fact, the very best political buddies of Donald Trump, specifically prominent figures like Viktor Orban and Robert Fico, so he should definitely have a serious word with them.
Russia has changed its tactics. And here we're talking about Moldova. The country's president stated that the Kremlin is spreading disinformation even more actively, using priests from the Russian Orthodox Church and the Matryoshka bot network.
From a military standpoint, this is important to them, and from a political standpoint as well. It's important to them because, let me remind you, Putin still proclaims this as his goal: to bring back the maximum number of post-Soviet countries into this so-called pseudo-empire. And here, of course, Moldova is one of the very important parts.
And what's going on in Chechnya? Well, there, Kadyrov apparently is already ready to hand over his post to his son Adam. After all, he said that Adam is now following the same path that Ramzan himself did before leading the republic.
I grew up next to my father. I was always by his side and I learned a lot precisely from being with him. Adam also grew up next to me. That's why he already has a wealth of experience and knowledge. He also has practical experience. When I was appointed to the position of First Deputy Prime Minister of the region, I was also young. Nevertheless, Vladimir Vladimirovich entrusted me with this post. Adam is also doing well, and I have no complaints. Although as his father, I expect much more from him than from others.
Ramzan also stated that his son does not have any unearned awards. Well, of course, who would doubt that? Nevertheless, is Ramzan really going to replace Adam?
So far, we haven't seen anything like that from Adam. So I understand Ramzan really wants it. Apparently, he is quite bad at it. And he is almost incapable of running the republic anymore and only remains in charge because the Kremlin refuses to allow Adam to become his successor. I'll make a little prediction and say that the Kremlin won't agree to it either.
But when it comes to handing out awards, Putin is a master. The Kremlin's master awarded Dmitry Medvedev the Order of Merit for the Fatherland, 4th class, thus making him a full holder of this order.
Medvedev turned 60 years old, and this full set of the orders classes, it's what you might call a reward for many years of service, for the fact that he fully carries out all the instructions given to him by the authorities.
Maybe Putin values Medvedev so much for his completely absurd statements. For example, Dmitry claimed that allowing NATO countries to shoot down Russian planes over Ukraine would mean a war between the alliance and Russia. Well, sure, why not?
You can be thick-headed and insane. Maybe it's artificial and crazy. By the way, in my opinion, it's impossible for anyone outside Russia to live sober. If you don't drink, you might go crazy. In any case, for Putin, he is necessary and useful. It's no coincidence, as we remember, that even Donald Trump commented on Medvedev, because next to the insane Medvedev, Putin seems, well, kind of reasonable, although in reality it's actually the other way around.
You're watching the YouTube channel Ukraine Today, and I'm Vladimir Rapchun in the studio with you. Subscribe to our channel, give this video a like, it's quick and easy for you. We appreciate it, and the YouTube algorithms like it too, which helps promote our content. The topics we'll be discussing over the next 20 minutes have already been announced in our segment, so now it's time to introduce our guest in the studio, political strategist Oleg Posternak, who is joining our broadcast. Oleg, glad to have you here. Oleg, hello.
Good afternoon.
The connection is working. There are a great many topics, but somehow they all boil down to the same thing. If you don't mind, I'd like to start with the latest statements from Trump and probably also the latest comments from Dmitry Alkogolich Medvedev. Let's even start with Medvedev. He said that if Western countries shoot down Russian missiles and drones over Ukrainian territory, that would be a direct confrontation between NATO states and Russia. And by the way, I think Peskov added that NATO is already at war with Russia anyway. What's going on? In your opinion, could you please give an assessment of the latest events?
What is currently happening and what we are observing is that the Russian Federation is actively attempting to escalate the ongoing new Cold War, which has been developing with Western nations, into a dangerous and precarious near-threshold conventional hot war. This explains the airspace incursions into NATO countries, with about 20 drones involved. This also explains the actions on Romanian territory. And most likely Russia will expand the range of actions against NATO countries on the territory of the Baltic states. Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia will obviously, in the near future, also remain epicenters for drone incursions, not only reconnaissance drones, but also strike drones. Therefore, when you carefully examine and consider the various public statements made by Dmitry Medvedev and the subsequent official clarifications provided by Dmitry Peskov, it becomes particularly intriguing and insightful to thoroughly consider and evaluate how much actual, genuine, and in-depth analysis of the complex information flows and narratives coming directly from the mouths of Kremlin officials and spokespersons is truly involved. In reality, armed confrontation between Russia and Western countries has taken various forms of intensity. This has included diplomatic standoffs, often characterized by expulsions and heated rhetoric. There have also been confrontations involving sophisticated hybrid threats, blending conventional and unconventional tactics. Furthermore, incidents such as explosions at equipment and ammunition depots have occurred. The appearance of drones over Germany's sensitive nuclear facilities has also been noted. Finally, extensive information warfare and election interference campaigns have been prominent features of this complex geopolitical landscape. It's all basically the same thing. It's all supposedly part of the same field. Yes, I understand.
Where you're going with this, without direct armed confrontation, but in that case, why does the Kremlin escalate? Why do such statements get made? After all, let's dare to assume that Dmitry Alkoholovich Medvedev didn't just wake up after another drinking binge and decide to write this on his own. Or when Peskov comes out and loudly declares that shooting down Russian drones and missiles over Ukrainian territory means something. That's a direct confrontation between NATO countries and Russia. It's not just for nothing. This is surely a text that was meticulously written and subsequently approved by a direct superior, for example, a prominent figure like Putin or other high-ranking individuals who are directly and deeply involved in Russia's ongoing and devastating war against Ukraine. So, I could be wrong, I'm just speculating right now.
There are two reasons here. First, by expanding the initiative of military actions, moving to another field in this chess game, Putin is showing that he is obsessed, that he won't back down, that he is a maximalist, and is obsessively determined to carry out his anti-Ukrainian program. And he won't back down, he won't compromise, he's not interested in consensus, he will go all the way. This is the main message in his actions against Poland and in the verbal threats from Medvedev and Peskov in the confrontation between the country and the West. That's the first reason. So the second reason is that, according to many analytical sources, Western countries in developing security guarantees for Ukraine might consider the option of closing the skies over Ukraine, at least over certain regions. And in order to preempt this and make this scenario as undesirable and unacceptable as possible, Putin is attacking Poland. In other words, he's showing that you can't even protect your own country's air defense and missile defense systems, so don't even think about protecting Ukraine. This is an expansion of active military operations, which he will undoubtedly get a taste for, because once you cross a truly formidable boundary, the powerful temptation and inherent tendency to cross it again inevitably arises, leading to further engagement. So to repeat once more, today it's drones, tomorrow it will be missiles. For example, I have absolutely no doubt about this, considering the reaction to it. Very bureaucratic actions. Nato responded in a completely reasonable, more rational and proportionate way to the situation. Poland reinforced its army at the border and closed the border. It wouldn't be a bad idea if, of course, Poland also launched another 20 reconnaissance drones over the Smolensk region, the Leningrad region, the Bryansk region, and the Tver region. By the way, that would look very synchronized and symmetrical, because the average Pole, German, French, or Italian citizen wouldn't get the impression that they're not protected. Previously, there was a belief that no one would even glance sideways at the country, let alone actually dare to commit an act of aerial aggression, even on a local level. Before this, everyone seemed to be under a protective shell, a collective defense, and they believed that the war was somewhere far away, not near them, not near their homes, even if it was in 3 voivodeships of Poland. But as it turns out, that's not the case. And now Putin is achieving this third important component as well. He is instilling fear, he is exploiting it, he lives off and revels in the fears of Europeans, the fear of war, of a weakened but still brazen Russia that does not curb its fanaticism, including its hatred toward European countries.
Ole, against this backdrop, in your opinion, what is happening in American politics or in military policy, geopolitics, based on the statements made by Trump, the American president, and the special envoy of the American president, General Keith Kellogg? Let me just remind our viewers. Right after Russia attacked Poland with drones, Trump said that it might have been a mistake. He didn't claim it was definitely a mistake or that they accidentally flew there. He simply suggested that it could have been an error. Soon after, Kellogg, while here in Ukraine and participating in a forum where this issue was discussed, stated that no, it was not a mistake. He said it was a deliberate strike by Russian drones on Polish territory, that the Russians are testing the borders, and so on. He also said that, essentially, at this stage, no one is afraid of Russia anymore, and no one thinks they might attack a NATO country or seize any more territory. In this case, we're not talking about Ukrainian territory, but the territory of other countries. How does this fit together? Is this some kind of quarrel or dispute within the American political establishment? Or does all of this coexist quite normally? I mean, Trump's statement, Kellogg's statement, Trump's position, Kellogg's position. Which of these is the official position of the United States of America? And in fact,
the position of the United States naturally is the commentary on Trump's remarks. Kellogg did not express this officially, not at an official meeting. He said it at the Yalta Strategy Summit. As a rule, various officials, dignitaries, and politicians speak there who are not bound by official protocol. They often share their own, very often private, opinions there. The same can be said about Rados Vesikorski, who made a rather interesting statement there, in my opinion. It concerned security guarantees for Ukraine. He said, if Europe is not ready now to fight for Ukraine against Russia, then what guarantee is there that it will do so later, when European countries become participants in the system of guaranteeing Ukraine's security? They would probably have to provide for the possibility of military assistance and direct military conflict with Russia. A very correct, very logical, very rational and competent statement. Kellogg did the same, saying that he does not believe so. How else could an American general assess drone attacks, including strikes on military targets, attempts to attack Rzeszów, and damage to private homes in the border areas, counties, and voivodeships of the Republic of Poland? How could a professional military officer assess a direct military attack? Trump is a politician, not a military man. Naturally, he will choose his words carefully, although many people are not sure that Trump really attaches much importance to everything he says, and I would probably agree with that opinion. Trump is very rash, sometimes quite frivolous in his statements. He is very straightforward and often blunt because he says exactly what he is thinking at that particular moment. And journalists, those sensation seekers, love to turn this into some kind of supposedly new shift in Trump's attitude. For example, today Trump used, for the first time in his vocabulary, the phrase that Russia is an aggressor. They made a big news story out of this, although I'm sure that by the day after tomorrow he'll have already forgotten that word. And in general, when it comes to Russia, he will never use it again, just as he never did before. Perhaps this is just a purely opportunistic fluctuation, like a certain signal to Moscow. Look, I'm already starting to go all the way here. Although at the same time, the bill, Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the US House of Representatives, says that the bill was essentially ready and Graham was prepared. The only thing missing is a green light from the biologist. There's no personal decision from Trump yet. And he spoke about this directly, clearly, and explicitly. So Trump has not made such a decision. That means he is unsure whether he wants to impose direct serious sanctions right now. He has set conditions, and these sanctions are becoming entangled with new requirements. By the way, these are completely beneficial for Ukraine, but they make the prospect of imposing tough sanctions against Russia from the American side a very illusory component, because it's clear that Europe is not going to impose secondary sanctions against China. That would be a red line for Europe. They barely managed to agree, after much wrangling, to the trade agreement with the US signed in Scotland. And it is very burdensome for part of the European Union's economy. Where is the guarantee that faced with losses, especially colossal losses, to their own trade, they would be willing to break off relations with the People's Republic of China? I don't believe it, and nobody believes it. And Trump doesn't believe it either. That's why this really looks like zero-sum blackmail when Trump understands that this won't work for Europe, but he has a strong argument for why he won't impose sanctions on Russia now. And with this argument, he will be able to skillfully fend off attempts to defend further actions and his own intentions to find common ground with Putin, including through the case of the so-called trilateral Sanjak, which people started talking about yesterday and today.
By the way, should we take into account, or at least pay attention to, the words of Trump's spiritual advisor, Burns? He said that we are now witnessing the formation of a new axis, and he named an additional player in this axis, one that was hardly mentioned before, namely India, against which the United States is imposing sanctions and urging Europeans to join these financial restrictions. Is this really the case? Is this truly the axis of evil that is now taking shape, or is it just Pastor Burns' personal opinion, which one may agree or disagree with, but not really take seriously?
India is a democratic country, unlike China, North Korea, Iran, and Russia, which are autocracies. India has always stood quite distinctly apart from this particular quadrangle, and I personally would not share that opinion at all, not in the slightest. India continues to be in a stage of democracy. Elections are held there, and India constantly chooses one or another type of political and economic course through elections. Unlike, for example, neighboring China, where a single ideology is determined, a single ruling party exists, and almost a single leader has been in power for a long time. Nothing like that exists in India. Right now, we are seeing a situational convergence of interests between Delhi and Beijing, but no other issues have been resolved, such as the territorial disputes between China and its neighbors. China's support for Pakistan is the most unpleasant point of misunderstanding and rejection for India regarding China's position. The problem of water resources, the issue of Tibet, the religious issue, all of these remain unresolved and cannot be resolved. Therefore, India definitely does not synchronize its actions with China due to the enormous number of contradictions between them. At the same time, however, India is ready to cooperate economically with China in ways that do not harm its own political interests. In fact, this is demonstrated both to Russia and to the West. That is precisely why American media outlets are now actively trying to stir up a significant wave of intense hate against India, because of India's understandable unwillingness to make any substantial concessions to the United States. Nevertheless, Trump remains optimistic about the upcoming meeting with Modi and about the attempt to resolve all their trade misunderstandings. However, knowing Trump's style of behavior, I'm not sure this will lead to success. Right now, the latest negotiations in Spain, in Madrid, between the trade representatives of China and the United States, this is already the fourth round of talks, and it is very unlikely that they will end successfully, because so far the contradictions between Washington and Beijing in the trade and commercial sphere are only growing.
Am I understanding you correctly, or am I understanding the situation correctly, that the United States of America is now presenting a rather positive scenario or voicing a rather optimistic outlook for the future, in which Russia, the aggressor country, will lose its revenues and will not be able to continue the war? However, in reality, they are withdrawing from this process, excuse the slang. They are stepping back from this process and are less and less willing to participate in the process of normalizing or pacifying the aggressor or establishing peace between Russia and Ukraine and ending the Russian war.
They are no longer participating. The peace settlement is in a state of crisis. You don't see any further movement there. The fourth round of negotiations is not taking place, and a bilateral meeting turned out to be impossible because Putin invited Zelensky to Moscow, and naturally the Ukrainian leader will not go to Moscow. In Anchorage, the meeting was essentially derailed. All its results and agreements were disrupted thanks to the joint Ukrainian-European front in opposing this war. Putin cannot break through Ukraine via other countries or through America, and so he continues to look for new tools and opportunities, including attacks on NATO countries, air attacks on NATO countries, to show his cards and trump cards, and to demonstrate that he will not be held back by this stalemate, in which undoubtedly the Americans are interested, as they still see no basis for resolving the Russian-Ukrainian war, which continues.
Against this backdrop, it's really not interesting to discuss what's happening in the Kadyrov family, whether he's dying or not, whether he wants to hand over his post to another Kadyrov or not. That's a completely different topic. Maybe we'll come back to discussing it another time. Oleg, thank you very much. Thank you for your analysis. Thank you for the information you've provided. We are following the developments. Oleg Pasternak, political technologist, joined our broadcast. Thank you.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.